So first up, we have appeal to pity. This is an argument that tries to create a sense of sympathy in the person you're arguing with. This is obviously F tier. It's only used by cowards and scoundrels and the like. Overall, just really, really weak argument. Next, we have argument from fallacy. This is a type of argument that says your opposition's claim is false simply because they used a fallacy in their argument. Obviously, if you're calling people out on using fallacies, you are also a coward and deserve to lose the argument. Finally, to round out F tier, we have argument from moderation. This is a type of argument that claims that the truth is a compromise between two different positions. While slightly better than the other two arguments we've seen in F tier, obviously centrism is cringe. You should never compromise and always hold the most extremist position you can. First up in E tier, we have appeal to ignorance. This argument states that a claim is true simply because there's no evidence showing that it's false. Well, just making shit up is pretty based. Using this as justification is just a sign of weakness. Appeal to ignorance should generally be avoided. Last up in E tier, we have the circular argument. When doing this, you assume that your conclusion is true inside your argument. There's not much to say about this one. It's pretty weak, and if you just want to assume that your conclusion is true, just might as well not go through any of the extra steps. First up in D tier, we have the bandwagon fallacy. This is a type of argument that claims that a statement is true because many other people also claim that it's true. While peer pressure is pretty high, you risk looking like a conformist, which you really never want to do. If an idea is good, generally very few people believe in it. Next up, we have the causal fallacy. This is a type of argument that conflates causation and correlation in it. Sometimes it can be successful in gaslighting your opponent, but it can be pointed out fairly easily and is generally not very effective. Otherwise, there's just not much to say about it. To round out D tier, we have the slippery slope fallacy. This is a type of argument that claims that if one event occurs, many others will follow without providing proper justification. This one's a classic, everyone knows it. However, if you really boil it down, it's just fear-mongering. People will be able to see through it. At the bottom of C tier, we have the straw man argument. This aims to argue with a point that your opposition isn't actually making, trying to paint their argument as weaker than it might actually be in reality. While effective in many situations, not dealing with your opponent's true argument shows weakness and is often quite cringe. Next up is the sunk costs fallacy. This is a type of argument that supports a decision simply because you have invested time, money, or effort into it already. While I am in favor of any argument that is in favor of gambling, if you do not have the mental fortitude to ignore sunk costs, you aren't a true Sigma male. Up next in C tier, we have the false dichotomy. This is a type of argument that claims that there's only two possibilities, despite not having proper justification. While making shit up and gaslighting your opponents show signs of a strong argument, the false dichotomy is somewhat inconsistent in its effectiveness, giving it the rank of C tier. Finally is the red herring argument. This is a type of argument where you include extra information that seemingly supports your argument, while in reality doesn't, to distract your opponents. It has similar weaknesses as the straw man, where you're not actually addressing the real argument in the conversation. However, confusing your opponent is always a positive, which bumps it up a little bit. Now we're getting to the good stuff at B tier. First up is appeal to authority. Appeals to authority are a type of argument in which someone claims that a statement is true just because other authoritative figures have also claimed that statement is true. This type of argument is much more effective than the bandwagon fallacy, and it also doesn't have the drawback in which you have to have a beta opinion to use it. Next up, we have the hasty generalization. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's when you make a generalized claim from a dataset that's too small. Generalizing and extrapolating is always pretty based. The only weakness that this argument has is that it had a data set to begin with and didn't just make it up. Finally, in B tier, we have equivocation. This is a type of argument where you use ambiguity in your language to create confusion in your opponent. Honestly, this is a pretty funny one because you kind of just say puns and then people think it's a good argument. Overall, pretty solid. First, in A tier, we have false attribution. This is a type of argument in which you use a false or fabricated source. Throughout this tier list, I've been advocating for just making shit up in your argument, and this is kind of the king of that, giving it a well-deserved spot in A tier. The only other one in A tier is, you know it, you love it, the classic ad hominem. This is a type of counter-argument where you attack a person making the argument rather than the argument itself. This one's a classic. Just go straight for the jugular. Why deal with your opponent's argument when you could simply portray them as a soy jack? Easily one of the simplest and most effective forms of argument on this list. Our penultimate item on this list is the proof by assertion. This is a form of argument where you simply restate your claim until people accept it. This one's very powerful. This is the king of gaslighting, and gaslighting is based. There's really nothing much better than just keep restating your argument without proper justification. Well, there is one thing better. This is a type of argument where you threaten physical violence unless your opposition accepts your claim. This, at its core, is the most effective and based argument you can make. If you find yourself using appeals to force in your day-to-day conversations, it might be a sign that you are a Sigma male. Anyway, here's the tier list. I hope you guys liked it. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. If you disagree with me, you're wrong. And I'll see you guys later.